Welcome to Deciphering Growth, the show that explores mental health from every angle. We bring you conversations with personal opinions, stories, and practical tips. We aim to break down the stigma and help you live your best life. So please sit back and let's dive in. Before we begin, we want to remind our listeners that this podcast represents the opinions of Tiffany Graves, Eric Stone, and the show's guests. The content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. Please consult a healthcare professional for any medical questions. The views and opinions expressed are our own and do not represent those of our workplaces. Listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content does not establish a doctor-patient relationship.
All right, we are back.
Back and ever ready to dive into more exciting topics.
Yes. Do you want to talk about what we're talking about today?
Yeah, so today we will be getting into the impact of emotional neglect. So again, I want to stay in the habit of trying to give it informed trigger warnings on some of this. So we will be talking a lot about really like childhood emotional neglect, caregiver neglect. I think we're going to signs of neglect in children, emotional neglect. So, if those are things that maybe, you're just maybe not wanting to listen to today, or maybe just in general don't want to listen to this, maybe just an episode to skip, or just maybe read the summary. So that's just the kind of the warning I want to give on the front end. Tiffany, anything that you're just wanting to give a little heads up for before we start to dive in?
We are going to be talking about what emotional neglect is, what it looks like, some examples of it. So if at any point you need to pause, please pause. We're not going to be mad at you if you don't listen to the full episode. We would prefer you to respect your own boundaries and triggers and take care of yourself first.
Yes, always. Uh, so maybe just jumping in with some definitions. So, childhood emotional neglect is a form of maltreatment in which caregivers fail to provide emotional and psychological support, validation, and attention to children needed during formative years.
Mhm.
I just want to make sure, Tiffany, we can kind of set the scene together because I know how we set this up will shape this discussion. So, anything you
Yes.
would add as maybe just a definition?
Yes, the biggest point I want to put in there is it's not always intentional. There are plenty of unintentional emotional neglect instances that do happen.
Mm, very good point. Already, why I appreciate my counterpart, as you all can hear and see. um, Often involves the absence of emotional responsiveness, nurturing, and engagement from caregivers. It can be just as harmful as other forms of abuse, and it can have long lasting effects on childhood emotional and psychological development, as well as adults. And so that's something why we're giving the trigger warnings and talking about it is because this is something that we know impacts many, many, many people.
Yes. Yes. And to keep going on to that, just to give some examples of what emotional neglect in childhood would look like, would be minimizing emotions, like you're fine, stop crying, that lack of affection. So rarely or never saying I love you or giving hugs. Emotionally unavailable parents, so caregivers that are physically present, but they're emotionally disengaged. Strict emotional rules. So discouraging from expressing emotions, especially negative ones like sadness or angers, or vice versa, where anger is the only one that's acceptable. Performance-based love. So affection and approval are only given when achievements are made, i.e., getting good grades. This is one that I encounter quite often where it's like, well, I was only praised when I did good things or I accomplish things. It is a form of emotional neglect, whether it's intentional or not. And the other one is forced independence, being told to toughen up or figure things out rather than like getting or receiving guidance about how to maneuver situations.
Yeah. And so again, I think something good to we're talking like we're not saying that it ever happens. Like I think pretty much 99% of my male clients, we were told to put dirt on it, toughen up, man up, or some of these things. So like I just want to maybe highlight like when we're talking about here would be like the scale of those comments, the scale of the like toughen up thing. So like I mean, if you could imagine almost never getting that emotional comfort, that safety, that okay, like I'm here for you. That has wide-ranging impacts. I mean, they've done, and I don't want to nerd out maybe too much, but like that's so much of the well-documented psychological research. So intro to psychology, there's so much about developmental psych, but so much about like there's this beautiful study and it shows like just literally for a few seconds what can happen for a baby if their mom is not emotionally connected, just like having a very flat affect and like how distressing that can cause. So if you just scale that by the thousands on thousands of interactions and eventually little ones learn that hey, I can't get comfort here, there's not going to be comfort for me.
Mhm. Yeah, and something also to keep in mind is this isn't necessarily black or white. There are very gray occurrences as well of where sometimes parents will be emotionally present and then other times they're not, just based on like other things that are happening. So these can also be like really weird gray intermingled experiences as well. I'm over here doing spirit fingers today.
That's all right, we love spirit fingers, we love the spirit. Um, yeah, and also just one of the things is just like inadequate attention. So, not listening, not offering comfort, even just celebrating, like I mean, we can talk about, oh, in my house, like this, like, that can be helpful, but also like it can be also really jarring if like to know that, to never be able to have anything celebrated, whether it be something little, something small, like that's extremely discouraging, like
Mhm.
extremely discouraging. And in the cases we're talking about, like damaging as well.
Yeah, very much so. Speaking of damaging, I'm gonna chunk into the neuroscience a little bit because I feel like it's needed. Um, Especially like the human brain like develops the most um in childhood with those early experiences, especially with relationships. There are kind of three main different parts that I want to talk about. First one is the prefrontal cortex, which is your regulator of emotions. It helps you to regulate emotions, make decisions, and understand social interactions. You learn emotional regulation through co-regulation as a child. So when a caregiver helps soothe distress, like i.e. rocking a crying baby or validating a child's feeling, that helps you to kind of understand and develop that skill for yourself. However, when these emotional needs are ignored, that prefrontal cortex does not develop with strong regulation abilities, which can lead to emotional dysregulation, impulsivity, and just an overall difficulty at managing stress. The amygdala is another system that's affected. That's your fear, stress, and emotional response system. Um, when you're growing up as a child, if you have consistent emotional support, that amygdala becomes overactive, which can lead to without my bad, I said with, but without consistent emotional support, the amygdala can become overactive, leading you to have heightened sensitivity to stress, emotional trigger, and even can be a foundational factor for anxiety disorders. Um, it can really kind of help us gauge how poorly or properly someone can emotionally respond to something. Which that plays into the other part of this the body's stress system, the HPA axis. And that just regulates your cortisol, which is your stress hormone, which I know we've talked a good amount about how like high cortisol can really have some damaging effects. Emotional neglect often causes and can contribute to chronic stress levels, which keeps those cortisol levels elevated, which can contribute to chronic anxiety, fatigue, burnout. And over time, that can lead into physical symptoms like digestive issues, inflammation, sleep disturbances, and weakened immune systems because your cortisol is staying so high. Um, and then that kind of leads us into a little bit away from, but still kind of attached to the brain, as we look at like the attachment styles and the nervous system. Emotional neglect disrupts that attachment styles, which can either lead us to have avoidant detachment, so we have difficulty forming deep emotional connections and a reluctance to rely on others, or that anxious attachment, where we have fear of abandonment and we're constantly seeking validation from others. Which I know that
Wow.
was just me regurgitating a lot of stuff.
But I feel smarter because you shared all this.
And all of this is present in adulthood, like relationship struggles, social anxiety, difficulty expressing emotions within your relationships. It's one of those things that, like, sometimes I think we overlook that comes from a foundation of how our parents either intentionally or unintentionally were emotionally available or unavailable.
I love that. Honestly, like, I appreciate Tiffany because it, I think, highlights that we are both therapists. I like to think we're both really good therapists, and like our approaches are, slightly different. I think that's a really beautiful thing because I know I do appreciate the science, but like I find myself like, stay awake, stay focused, stay in, but it's like it's really important, So it's like I think we probably split the most. Like if you're so, um, it's okay if maybe you're like me where you just need a second of like my brain here's the HP access, and I'm like, time for a mental break. And it's like, no, like do this, focus. Um, it's very important. But I guess this is a little heavier, but I was gonna maybe talk a little bit about some of the signs of emotional neglect in
Mhm.
children, if you think that kind of tracks with where we're headed, Tiffany.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, I think that lines up perfectly. We just talked about how it affects their brain. Now we can look at how it makes them behave.
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. I just, we always record these live, folks. So we do a little check in of what we're going to do, but we really think it adds some richness to check in live a little bit. So you're not hearing us. I wouldn't want to hear me act. So we don't want to do that today.
I can't
So
ask.
well, this is good that we found each other. So some of the things we're talking about for signs of emotional neglect in children. And I also want to just throw just quick clarification. They may indicate signs. So again, if you're seeing more of these than less, like probably something to be worried about. But I am not meaning to say any of these mean that someone's being a child's being emotionally neglected. Okay, extremes in behavior, including compliance, becoming overly passive or demanding or aggressive, acts like very inappropriately adult, like almost like looking after children. There is this term called the parentified child that I'm gonna use a lot in therapy. So typically this means like you were feeding you're a sibling or responsible for a sibling. I think a really extreme example of this is like the Duggars literally assigned their kids a kid. So there was like a 6-year-old taking care of a 2-year-old, and I mean,
That's crazy.
literally they were assigned. Like it was like a parent. And I'm not glorifying it. I'm like, it was, that was their childhood, was basically being a nanny to a sibling. And then I don't remember how many kids, but it was
I would argue, I don't know if that's an appropriate thing to say they had a childhood at that point.
I think it's a classic example of not, because I mean, how can you have a child if you're like, oh, okay, are they wet? Are they dry? Okay, like I mean, they literally from like brushing teeth in the morning to like all day. So yeah, I agree with that.
Ooh,
Um, Acts inappropriately infantile, so just acting like very young can be a response. Delayed emotional or physical development, symptoms of depression, suicidal ideation, and an inability to form uh, emotional bonds. So I know that those are pretty heavy things to just kind of go through, but those would be things to be looking out for. So, maybe you're a teacher, and I obviously you've got a license, you've gone through programs. Maybe you volunteer, but it would just it would look like not a typical response. And I know we kind of have some lovely discourse about like kids, and some people don't want to be around kids, which I totally understand. But this is for like those who are around kids, maybe family or things, like kind of noticing like, oh, that's a little different, and all of us are different, but there's certain degrees of difference on certain responses that can be signs of neglect, trauma, or things to be concerned about.
Mhm.
One thing I've mentioned, I know on a few episodes, but if you are in Cincinnati, check out the Cincinnati Museum Center. It's beautiful Art Deco architecture. It actually has really good food. We don't have enough time to talk about the food. Great children's museum, cave, functional dinosaurs, all of it. But one of the things that's really cool is there's this functional health exhibit. And within the functional health exhibit, there is a mental health section along with lots of other healthcare pieces. And there is an adverse childhood experience scale, and there's a spinner, and you spin and you start neutral. And one of the things it explains is like if you're leaning one direction, positive or negative, and you have a neutral experience, it goes the way you're leaning. So if you had some tough early childhood experiences, neutral things could actually make that worse. And so it just highlights how hard it is to overcome some of those traumatic events. You all probably heard us in our episode roasting the body keeps score. That is the one thing that I do like from the book and appreciate from the book, that it does highlight the best way to prevent addiction and mental health illness would be reducing childhood trauma. That would be one of the most successful ways to create improvements. So when we're looking at adverse childhood experiences, there was a study in 2023 looking at Chinese university students looking at adverse childhood experiences, attachment styles, and depression. And the authors found that adults who experienced childhood emotional neglect had maybe a overreaction to stress, fear, and being sensitive to perceived signs of rejection, in some cases hypersensitive, suppressing or avoiding negative emotions, having difficulty forming and maintaining new relationships, having trust issues, experiencing symptoms of depression, finding it difficult to communicate things, and having insecure attachment styles.
Yeah. So, since you're talking about the behavioral part here, I'm gonna put you on the hot seat. What are some ways that people could, if at all, determine when a kid is acting out from emotional neglect versus some other form of underlying concern?
I think exploring their world just is the quickest way. So I mean, if it's like a niece or a nephew, like, oh, what's going on for them? Or if it's maybe you're a coach or a volunteer, like just trying to explore their world a little bit and try to find an answer. I think what would be harder, right, is if maybe you're at the store and see something. Like one, you probably shouldn't be an adult randomly going up to children if you don't have a job or role, like a police officer or something to do. Uh, so I guess it's just kind of comparing, and I think we know, probably all of us know the signs of malnutrition, or oh, that's a bruise, but harder with some of the emotional stuff. But I mean, even us therapists talk about sometimes how it's hard to determine what
Mm.
is the line for certain things. So without like probably spending a good hour giving examples of things, I think for most of us it's probably context clues, looking at things, and I guess it just depends on the age of the kid. And I guess also the degree of what you're picking up on, I mean, if you saw someone screaming at a kid, like just absolutely screaming, and like that could be a cause for concern, I mean, if it was like in the middle of a restaurant, or so I think the context would shape a lot of it.
Yeah. And I wanted to make that point because even as professionals, it can be hard sometimes to discern like the true underlying cause. So if you're kind of questioning yourself whether or not either you're doing this or you're noticing someone doing this or someone like in this potential situation, like it can be really hard to recognize um at times. Um, that being said, though, I do kind of want to point out some of the really subtle impacts that it has on self-esteem that might actually be a little bit easier to pick up on. But that being said, I don't want to like tack these to like these only occur like if you have emotional neglect from childhood. These can also pop up from other occurrences. Um, and that's self-doubt, um, second guessing decisions because emotions were never validated. You kind of like don't have that appreciation for yourself, that people pleasing, prioritizing others' needs over one's own to avoid rejection, that fear of expressing your needs, feeling like a burden when asking for help, chronic loneliness, difficulty forming close emotional connections, perfectionism, so feeling the need to earn love through achievements, and imposter syndrome, feeling like success is undeserved due to deep-seated self-doubt that comes from that emotional neglect. Um, and I guess the biggest thing to think about is whether it's intentional or not, when someone experiences emotional neglect, that unspoken message that tends to get iterated to them is that your emotions don't matter, which on some deeper seated level can easily be processed as like, I don't matter. So really being careful about validating people's emotions, like regardless of age, to help people recognize your emotions do matter and they are valid and you are valid.
It's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, there's lots of different angles we could take
Mhm.
this, I think. I don't know if there's really a right or wrong way, but I think I get why it's maybe as heavy as it is.
Yeah. So on those self-esteem impacts, like what have you encountered? What have you noticed? Like, have you ever caught yourself in any of those potential systems?
Um, it's a good question. I guess it does seem like there's easy times to not maybe know where something's coming from or feeling like a wound is coming forward. But yeah, I think it would be hard to identify all the times. I don't know if we always know. I don't know. What about you? Have you found that you've ever caught yourself in something or seen yourself in something?
Well, for sure. For sure. People pleasing, that's one I constantly catch myself in, and I have to remind myself of like I can't make everyone happy even if I like wanted to. I have no magic wand, unfortunately. Um, and then I think imposter syndrome, and this is why I preface with like it doesn't have to these things don't necessarily have to come from childhood emotional neglect. Because when I hear imposter syndrome, I feel like almost everyone in our field like has experienced it at one point where we're like, we're just trying to make it. We don't really know what we're doing.
I do think there's a lot of just different challenges out there for people. And I think, I think one of the things I enjoy our podcast and one of the challenges was like how much detail or how many directions do we go? So I think kind of today it's like signs and looking out for things. And I think like you could probably have a whole separate podcast just on emotional neglect and situations and things that come up. Um, I kind of prepped one last piece, which is just kind of talking about emotional neglect and the impact on relationships. So as a couples therapist, like I do see the impact of emotional neglect in different situations. And so I did just kind of find a few things that may be of interest, but I don't want to pull us there too soon. Tiffany, if there's anything else on this you wanted to highlight.
No, I mean, go for it. Like, pull us there. Like,
Yeah. So you and your partner misread each other's true feelings, actions, thoughts, or intentions very often. Positive emotions like love, warmth, feeling emotionally connected are awkward or only happen during sex. You feel alone when you're with your partner. As a couple, you avoid bringing up difficult things to not upset each other. Your conversations are mostly focused on facts, events, or logistics. You haven't figured out how to argue productively. Your spouse is not the first person you want to tell when something great happens or a problem comes up. If you seek comfort, they will often say the wrong thing. You feel like you're on a team. You don't feel like you're on a team taking life together. And it can be difficult to find something to talk about. So, not uncommon for a few of those things to pop up, but if you're noticing a lot of those things, or if you're noticing a few of those things to a pretty high level, that could be a good example of maybe assessing like, is there something going on? Is this coming from something underneath?
hmm. Well, how would I identify like what is a high level?
I think the impact of where it's showing up. So is it showing up at work or in your relationship, or where is it showing up in your life? So I think it's about the degree of, I don't want to call it dysfunction, but the degree of impact and how that is showing up.
So like in a sense of like if it's making daily functioning difficult, high impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think degrees of function, I think also just kind of trusting your gut of like, okay, this doesn't feel right. Like I think again, I'm, why I'm having to keep pausing. Like, it's very difficult to say, oh, if this is happening at all, you should do it. Because it's like, what if someone's already in individual therapy and they're working on it? What if
Mhm.
they're, it's so I really struggle with blanket statements of like that. But there are some things we can make some of those statements on, and the Gottman Institute has some, but I will just try to be very careful. I don't want to, I would hate for someone to listen and be discouraged because it's like, well, hey, this is something like, just sometimes something that can happen in therapy is like, oh my God, I have another problem or another thing to solve. And so wanting to not overwhelm.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
those are good questions.
Mhm. So I want us to recognize and acknowledge like emotional neglect is real and it has long term effects. But the biggest thing I like also want to point about recognizing the impact is that like this isn't about blaming the caregiver. It's about breaking the cycle.
How would you want to break the cycle?
So being able to recognize like how one experienced emotional neglect, whether it was intentional or not, and then being able to kind of backtrack and like harness those skills, add more skills to their coping box, and kind of like help them like heal that inner child and have those emotional experiences. But I mean I can't tell people what to do. But like this doesn't need to become like a blame game. Like not to excuse emotional neglect, like that's not what I'm trying to say, but, like, it's just there's no healing and just sitting in, like, "Well, it's my mom or dad's or so and so's caregiving fault, I'm this way, so, like, sucks to be me." That doesn't help us be productive in any shape or form. Yes, we can be mad at them and we can have all the feelings and thoughts towards them, but just sitting in that blame, it doesn't break the cycle. It doesn't move you forward. It doesn't help you heal and learn. You're just kind of repeating the cycle,
Wow.
which is easy.
I
I mean,
No, no. I mean, I think this is really just helpful, genuinely. Like, I think this is just really, really helpful to have this conversation.
yeah, like I've seen so many individuals like sit in it and it's easy. Like it's super easy to be like, well, this is the skills that I have. This is where I'm at. So this is where I function from versus like doing the hard work in therapy and like taking a new path that's never been forged for yourself. Um, but it's also one of those things I encourage people of like, you can either do the hard work now or you can regret not doing the hard work at all later. Which one do you feel more comfortable in carrying with you?
Mm, yeah. And I think it maybe just encouraging people that find themselves impacted by some of these things. Like, you all have to start somewhere, and like we all pick a point to start. And so we make changes every day. Um, so many of us try to make changes, then fall off the wagon and get back on. And so, don't feel discouraged if it's like, oh wow, I'm really noticing the impact. Like, just we all have to start somewhere. And so, even if it's not a perfect path, which I think it are usually never is, it's worth doing. And if the change is worth doing, I'd encourage people to pursue that in whatever way they can, because there's lots of ways of healing, whether it's in therapy or other healing activities.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think the biggest thing to remember is growth is not linear. It's not like you start and you keep going straight. It's up, it's down, it's regression, it's progress. It's all over the place.
Agreed.
Yeah. So, anything else in the deeper sense of things that you wanted to talk about, or?
No, I think that's everything I prepped for today, and I guess I look forward to hearing from anyone on like their thoughts or things they'd like to hear more of. But I guess I'm cautious with what I get into with some of these things because I just know it's just very important topics. So I'd hate for anyone ever to uh, feel like we're just too casually jumping in.
Yeah. Well, the couple things I wanted to cover before we completely wrap up and leave everyone for the day. Um, you do have the ability to rewire your brain. Your brain is very neuroplastic, and that it can be like reformed, so to speak. Mindfulness and meditation is really great in helping strengthen your prefrontal cortex and improving emotional regulation. Therapy, especially trauma-informed approaches like EMDR, IFS, and somatic therapy, can help process emotional wounds. Um, Journaling, um, some people like it, some people don't, but it can help develop emotional awareness as you're processing through experiences. And then breath work. Breath work can help soothe an overactive stress response and help with nervous system regulation. It doesn't have to be like super fancy. It can be the 4-4-4, where you breathe in for 4, you hold for 4, and you breathe out for 4, and you repeat. Um, and then if you really want to like do the hard, deep, nitty-gritty dive, you can always do some reparenting work. So some inner child work with a therapist, some self-validation. There are some self-help books out there, but I caution people to like not do them by themselves. But again, I can't tell you what to do. Um, just I know reparenting oneself without guidance can be really difficult sometimes.
Very helpful, Tiffany. I appreciate your perspectives today.
Yeah. Well, I hope you had as much fun talking about this as I did. Um,
Anything beats talking about the body keeps score. And if you're a new listener, um, we just invite you to listen to that episode because it's probably the one I was looking forward to being done the most.
yeah, that's fair. I did my best to get like a roasty title, but I don't know if I got it roasty enough.
Oh, I like wonder they won't find it, but I was like, if you are the author of A Body Keeps Score and want to defend your book, you have an open invitation anytime to come on because I would love to talk to you
Ooh,
a little bit.
I have all the questions of like all those where they got in trouble and they got fired for allegations. I'm like, I want to know more. How do I
Yeah,
get the trauma informed there?
I doubt that they'll come, but hey, anytime. I'd be happy to clear my time because I just have like a few thousand questions to ask.
Yes.
And who doesn't want to answer 1,000 questions recorded for the world to hear and see?
Yeah, that's a valid point. Valid point. All right. All right. Well, you want to wrap us up or do you want me to wrap us up? Who's wrapping up today?
Um, I can wrap us up. I would say, just some things to look out for on emotional neglect, signs to be on the lookout. And so, again, just remembering we all have to start somewhere. There are things that we can all do to work on things, manage some of these things, and also uh, just being on the lookout that, how many of these things, the level of something, the impact of something, those are all things to be looking out for. Check us out on the Patreon. We do have a lot of wonderful resources there, some special episodes, some soapboxes. And also be on the lookout. We have some really exciting speakers coming in the next couple of episodes that we're really looking forward to. And so also we have some wonderful colleagues, and some of them we're trying to get some schedules to collide, of course, but we are excited to kind of bring more and more expertise and the goal of lowering the stigma around discussing trauma and mental health. And I'll throw it to you, Tiffany.
Yeah, no, I mean you wrapped us up perfectly. I hope everyone has had a wonderful time, air quotes on wonderful guys, listening to this podcast episode today. And we hope that you continue just to keep growing.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Deciphering Growth. We hope you found our conversation helpful and insightful. Subscribe to our podcast for more episodes and check out our Patreon for more content. Don't hesitate to contact us on social media if you have any questions or comments. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep growing.